I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm just going in for a heart pacemaker being fitted. But here's my presentation. I hope you find it interesting. Thank you. My name is Derek Stewart. I'm a strategic partner working with the Health Research Board Trials Methodological Research Network in Ireland, although I'm actually based in the UK. I was born in Scotland. I trained as a teacher, worked in Nottingham after Glasgow. In 1995 I was diagnosed with throat cancer, and that's my radiotherapy mask. And more recently fitted with a heart monitor, which is why I'm going in for the pacemaker. Throughout all of this, the one word that comes out is learning. From being a teacher to being a patient to being a patient advocate. The title of today's talk is Asking Better Questions about Patient and Public Involvement in Our Research. And it's about the crucial role you play as clinical trial managers in this process, because you're in the unique position to ask those better questions. If we just ask, have you done PPI, patient-public involvement? The danger is that somebody answers and says, oh yes, I've got a PPI person, although I've no idea what that is. Or I've got an advisory group, or perhaps better still, I've got somebody as a co-applicant. These are all great things to do, but ultimately it's not just about having the person, it's about what they do and what gets done together. Actively involving patients and the public is about why we're having the conversation in the first place, how we inform and shape the ideas, the design, the conduct, the analysis, and even the reporting of research. It's about what we can learn together in partnership and that joint decision making. It's never about a culture, change. It's about transparency, trust, and people's behaviours. It's a process, not a methodology. It's not about, oh, I've done PPI. Saying you've done PPI means that you've done the initials rather than actually had the conversation. The first question is not, have you done PPI? The first question is fundamentally, what actual conversations and discussions have you had with those who are likely to benefit from that research? And by that I'm talking about the patients or future participants of the research. So it becomes more of the past tense, what have you done, rather than what are you going to do if you receive the money. Conversations have to have a purpose. They can't just be, let's go and have a chat and a cup of tea. If they've to have that purpose, then you have to think, what is it we're having the conversation about? And these apply both ways. They're not just what we take from patients. So if I take the word insights, by me being involved in research, I gain insights into what the latest research is, what they're looking at, what they're thinking about. But you as the researcher might get insights into what it was like to being a patient. So the purpose of these talks can be about motivating people. Because when I hear of some of the work that's going on, I go, wow, it won't make a difference to my life, but it motivates me to think of what research is doing. It might be about learning, it might be about knowledge I've got about where to recruit patients, where's the best place to have those conversations, about when to recruit them. That knowledge I just happen to know because I've been through the experience. But equally it might be advice you're looking for or people's opinion. But if we start with these, we have a better purpose. The second question that you as trial managers can ask is, as a consequence of that conversation, what has changed in your research? Is the research question better? Have you looked at the outcome measures and looked at patient-reported outcomes? Because what a patient might tell you is a reported outcome might be quite different from what you're looking. What about the inclusion measures, the exclusion measures? What about the patient information leaflet? So ultimately, you've had the conversation, but what's been the impact? What's the effect of it? And if you ask that question, again, you help to improve the research and the way the protocol is written. The third question for me, which is growing in impetus over the last few years, is what effect might your study have on particular groups or communities? To think about, for example, for doing prostate cancer, the risk of an Afro-Caribbean male is 10 years earlier than somebody who's white and of a white background. South Asian families with their propensity possibly to diabetes and heart disease. So how do we look at that? And if you've not looked at the include ethnicity framework by trial forwards, then I urge you to do so now. The fourth question, because we've got the detail and the information up to the writing of the proposal and it going in for funding and you as a trial manager and your role in taking it forward. But what are the next planned conversations you're intending to have? And those may be around the funding. Does the funding proposal, does it look all right? Have you spoken to patients about it? What about recruitment? Where you think you want to recruit in a hospital might not be the best place for me to be recruited. And I might have information that could help on that. Increasingly, we're seeing trials that have a website. So how can you keep people updated? And what would I like to read on that update? Is it more than just the numbers of people that have been recruited? I might like to know about you and your careers and what you're intending to do. So my fifth and last question at this stage is, what advice are you seeking from patients to inform participants about the study results in plain language? And this is, of course, part of the transparency campaign, the Make It Public work that's going on with the Health Research Authority. And as co-chair of that campaign group, it would be remiss of me not to mention it today. But as of quite soon, next year when the legislation goes through, it will be the law to inform patients about the outcomes of a study. And it will be done in a plain language summary. I would suggest to you that as clinical trial managers, you encourage researchers to think, how can we get patients to have those conversations? What do they want to see in that plain language summary? And how they would like to see the data being explained. Because that way it could be truly meaningful, not just to the study, but to future research. The easy read version of the 5 questions are, what actual conversations have you had? So what? So in other words, what's the impact? Where's equality, diversity and inclusion? As well as access. How do people get to take part in studies? How do we involve them fully? What next are you going to be doing? And then finally, show it. Show and tell. Not only in the plain language summary, but also in the reporting of patient and public involvement. Because if it's not written up in the publication, then in evidence terms, it didn't happen. So please write it up and show it. In the second part of this presentation, I want to look at what patient and public involvement in research looks like and give you some thoughts on that. And in particular, I'm using some slides that I'm preparing for the work that I'm doing in Ireland at the moment. So it's looking at involvement in methodological research, but I think the learnings from it equally apply to all research, including clinical research. Colm Tóibín, the Irish writer, describes as a child going from the village of Enniscorthy to the big town of Wexford. And he says, Wexford had a sense of elsewhere. It was something magical, something bigger, something different, something creative, imaginative. Why might it feel like elsewhere? With clinical studies, people bring their direct personal experience. But with things like research, which includes data and data managers or lab-based aspects, then it feels slightly different, both for those methodological researchers and for patients, the public. It feels as if we're being pulled apart from each other. For the methodological or data or lab, they have less direct contact with patients, the public. What they do is highly specific and exact in nature, and it is difficult to see the purpose. Equally for the patients and public, it's less about our personal experience, more about patients and the public in future, and it's difficult to see what we can do. So how do we find somewhere? So from elsewhere to somewhere seems to me a bit like this. If I'm going for a trip to France, I don't need to learn all of the French language. I don't need to know the whole French language. And equally for researchers, they don't need to know everything that happened to me. They don't need to know the intricacies of radiotherapy. What we do need for these journeys is a tourist guide, a phrase book, some basic information, the currency, where to eat, etc., and suggestions about where to visit. Equally, sometimes with this world, it feels like if you're buying a watch because of the detail, again, researchers need to know every aspect of what I've been through on my patient journey, nor do I need to know all the detail of what they do. However, we might want to talk about how to look at the after the watch, the choices of watch face, how to change the battery, and what we think about the style, the comfort, the practical use. And equally in those conversations, if I come across a problem or a difficulty on my trip to France or when I'm buying, how do I have that conversation? How do I have the space to ask those questions? And do I feel that I'm able to do so? And somewhere seems to me to have common ground for mutual benefit. Where do we have the space to talk about things? We have clear expectations of what we're going to get out of having a conversation. As a safe space to talk. As a reason for the discussion, whether that's to talk about an uncertainty, a risk, or a benefit. And I've found that the more we use metaphors, pictures, to explain and make sense of it, then we can all come together. But ultimately, somewhere is somewhere that welcomes and encourages to stay in touch. Colm Tóibín, in his book, and in the story about a guest to the feast, says, "For me, even still, Wexford is the most exotic place. But then it was pure wonder. It had a Woolworths and a bookshop and a long street where you were unlikely to meet anyone you knew. But mainly it was that sense of elsewhere, of being away from home, if only for a few hours, that made the town of Wexford so great. But if we think about that, we know what happened to Woolworths, that it didn't keep up with the trend, didn't look online, and never failed. Bookshops are places of learning, but when we look at how books have changed from being on a paper to being on Kindle and other electronic forms, but it's that long street where we meet people we might not know. And too often in public involvement, we meet the usual suspects, often me and others, who've been around. And the challenge is, how do we find new people, new blood, new insights, new ideas? Thank you very much for that, and I hope you've enjoyed that session.